good evening, or good morning, wherever you may be across this great land of ours, or perhaps halfway around the world in the dead of night. This is a special tribute episode dedicated to the man whose voice became a companion to millions in the darkness, the one and only Art Bell. Tonight, we journey back to the high desert of the great American Southwest, to those midnight hours when the world felt stranger and more mysterious. We pay homage to the late, great broadcaster who transformed AM radio into a portal for the unexplained, the paranormal, the fringe, and the downright mind-bending. From UFOs to time travelers, from exorcisms to bottomless pits, this is the full life story of Art Bell, his unforgettable catchphrases, the legendary guests who joined him in the ether, his most memorable moments that still send chills down spines, and how his show became a lifeline for night shift workers, long-haul truckers, insomniacs, and anyone who needed company in the darkness, or something to stay awake, or to drift peacefully to sleep. I'm your host for this journey, and together we will relive the magic that was Coast to Coast AM. So dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin where it all started. Arthur William Bell III was born on June 17, 1945, in Jacksonville, North Carolina, in the shadow of Camp Lejeune, a military town. The only child of a U.S. Marine Corps captain father and a no-nonsense Marine drill instructor mother, young Art grew up with constant moves due to his parents' service. Yet he found his true home early in the crackle of radio waves. By age 13, he was already a licensed amateur radio operator, and that early passion would shape his entire life. During the Vietnam War era, Art enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and served as a medic. Stationed at Amarillo Air Force Base, he didn't just follow orders, he bent them. In his off hours, he ran a pirate radio station right out of his barracks, blasting music the Armed Forces radio network wouldn't touch. It was rebellious, bold, and gave the first real taste of what Art Bell could do with a microphone and an audience. After his service, he studied engineering and worked as a board operator at various stations. He eventually landed in Okinawa, Japan, where he spent 6 years as a disc jockey for KSBK. There, he pulled off a legendary stunt, staying on the air for more than 5 straight days without sleep, earning a spot in the Guinness World Records. He later joked that it was an experience he would never repeat, but it proved his incredible endurance and deep love for the airwaves. Back in the States, Art spent nearly 2 decades in rock radio. Then, in 1978, he launched a late-night political call-in show called West Coast AM on KDWN in Las Vegas. It started as straightforward talk radio, but by 1988, partnering with producer Alan Corbett, he rebranded it Coast to Coast AM and moved the studio into his own home in Pahrump, Nevada, the high desert that would become legendary. What began as a 5-hour overnight slot exploded in the mid-1990s when Art fully embraced the paranormal, UFOs, ghosts, conspiracies, alternate realities, topics most mainstream media refused to touch. He opened the phone lines wide, and listeners flooded in from across the country and beyond. At its peak, Coast to Coast AM was syndicated on more than 500 stations across the U.S. and Canada, reaching an estimated 10 to 15 million listeners a night. Art also created its companion show, Dreamland, for even deeper dives into the fringe. He broadcast from a modest studio filled with maps, books, and his famous microphone, sending his signal into the void. And the void answered back. Art Bell's voice and catchphrases became instantly recognizable to millions. His delivery was calm, measured, and slightly raspy, like a wise friend sharing secrets at 2 a.m. He never shouted or sensationalized. He simply listened, and his words carried quiet authority. Every show opened with the iconic greeting, "From the high desert of the great American Southwest. This is Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell." Or sometimes, "Good evening" or "Good morning," wherever you may be across this great land of ours. He would sign off open lines with, "This is Art Bell, and you're on the air with Coast to Coast AM." When callers forgot to turn down their radios, he had the classic zinger, "I don't care if you are the Antichrist. If you don't turn down your radio, you'll get blown out of here every time." Fans loved his dry humor and his references to the quickening, those times when events seemed to accelerate, and the world changed faster than anyone could keep up. He would gently tease callers while always leaving room for wonder. "West of the Rockies, you're on the air. East of the Rockies, go ahead." Simple phrases spoken in that unmistakable tone became rituals. Listeners across time zones felt part of a secret club meeting under the stars. Art's style was skeptical, yet open. He often said he didn't necessarily believe everything, but he believed in asking the questions. That balance made the show feel safe for both believers and skeptics alike. It was theater of the mind at its finest. Art Bell didn't just interview people. He gave them a platform no one else would. He spoke at length with the biggest names in the paranormal, and their conversations stretched for hours, drawing in millions. Frequent guests included Whitley Strieber, author of Communion, who shared harrowing alien abduction accounts that Art treated with deep respect. Richard C. Hoagland, the former NASA consultant, obsessed over the face on Mars and ancient lunar structures, breaking down government cover-ups in space. Terence McKenna, the ethnobotanist and psychedelic philosopher, delivered mind-expanding talks on time wave zero, DMT, and the end of history. Dannion Brinkley, the near-death survivor struck by lightning, returned with messages from the other side. Ed Dames, the former military remote viewer, warned of kill-shot solar events and future catastrophes. Linda Moulton Howe brought decades of cattle mutilation investigations and UFO research. George Knapp delivered bombshell updates on Area 51. Physicist Michio Kaku blended hard science with speculation on parallel universes. And towering among them all was Father Malachi Martin, the legendary exorcist, biblical scholar, and former Jesuit priest whose appearances on Coast to Coast AM remain some of the most haunting and talked about in the show's history. Born Malachi Brendan Martin on July 23, 1921, in the small village of Ballylongford, County Kerry, Ireland, he was the fourth of 10 children in a devout Catholic family. He joined the Jesuits in 1939 at age 18, beginning a rigorous path of formation. He earned doctorates in Semitic and Oriental languages, archaeology, and paleography from the University of Louvain in Belgium, with advanced work at Oxford and the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was ordained a Jesuit priest in 1954 on the Feast of the Assumption. Martin quickly rose as a brilliant scholar. He became professor of paleography at the Vatican's Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome, where he conducted groundbreaking research on the Dead Sea Scrolls, publishing the seminal 2-volume work The Scribal Character of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1958. He participated in archaeological excavations across the Middle East, including sites in Byblos and Tyre in Lebanon, the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt, where he assisted in his very first exorcism, performed on a Muslim man. By 1958, he had become a close aide and secretary to Cardinal Augustin Bey, the powerful German Jesuit who headed the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity. In that role, Martin was deeply involved behind the scenes during the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965, serving as an advisor to popes and cardinals, acting as a discreet source for major media outlets like the New York Times, and witnessing firsthand the dramatic reforms sweeping the Church. But Martin grew profoundly disillusioned. He saw the post-conciliar changes, especially within the Jesuits, as a betrayal of traditional Catholic teaching, a dangerous liberalization that opened the door to secularism, moral decay, and even demonic influence. In 1964, he requested and received from Pope Paul VI a release from his Jesuit vows of obedience and poverty, while retaining his priestly faculties and vow of celibacy. He left Rome in 1965, moved to New York City, worked odd jobs like dishwashing and driving a cab, and eventually became a U.S. citizen. There, he launched a prolific writing career that produced more than a dozen bestsellers, both nonfiction and novels, many of them fiercely critical of the Vatican hierarchy. His 1976 blockbuster Hostage to the Devil detailed 5 real-life cases of demonic possession and exorcism in modern America, filled with raw, terrifying descriptions that became a cultural phenomenon after the film The Exorcist. Other major works included The Jesuits, The Society of Jesus and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church, 1987, which accused the order of undermining core doctrines, The Final Conclave, 1978, Vatican, 1986, The Keys of This Blood, 1990, a geopolitical analysis of Pope John Paul II's struggle against communism and capitalism for world influence, and the novel Windswept House, 1996, which graphically depicted satanic rituals and infiltration inside the highest levels of the Church. Martin claimed to have performed or assisted in hundreds of major exorcisms and thousands of minor ones over his lifetime. He spoke openly about the third secret of Fatima, warning that the Vatican had not fully revealed its apocalyptic contents, and he repeatedly sounded alarms about Satanism and demonic possession reaching into the Church itself. He described exorcisms in vivid clinical detail: the superhuman strength of the possessed, the stench of sulfur, the voices speaking ancient languages, the physical levitations, and the brutal spiritual battles that could last days or weeks, often leaving the exorcist physically and spiritually drained. Art Bell first welcomed Father Martin to Coast AM on October 18, 1996, for a marathon discussion on exorcism that stretched for hours. It was the beginning of a remarkable series. Martin appeared at least 7 times between 1996 and 1998, becoming one of Art's most requested and memorable guests. In those late-night conversations, often lasting 3 hours or more, Martin's calm, scholarly Irish brogue delivered some of the most chilling radio ever broadcast. He recounted specific cases from Hostage to the Devil, describing victims who spoke in unknown tongues, vomited impossible quantities of foul matter, and exhibited knowledge of the exorcist's most private sins. He warned listeners about the growing presence of demonic activity in everyday life, in politics, and even within the Vatican walls. One unforgettable segment involved Martin explaining how he could sense the presence of evil during the call itself, and how the battle against it was intensifying in the modern world. Listeners reported feeling an almost physical weight in the air, with some turning off their radios because the atmosphere in their homes became unbearable. Art himself sounded genuinely unsettled at times, yet he gave Martin the same respectful, open platform he gave every guest, letting the priest speak at length without interruption. Those interviews remain legendary, replayed endlessly, analyzed in documentaries, and still capable of sending shivers through new generations, discovering them online. Art also welcomed mainstream voices, musicians like Willie Nelson, Crystal Gayle, Merle Haggard, and Gordon Lightfoot, comedians like George Carlin and even a young Joe Rogan, sci-fi authors like Dean Koontz and Greg Bear, X-Files creator Chris Carter, and actors like Leonard Nimoy and Dan Aykroyd. They all felt comfortable opening up on Coast to Coast because Art created a space without judgment. He also platformed controversial figures, John Lear on secret black projects, Bob Lazar on reverse-engineered alien craft at S4, Robert Bigelow on his own UFO research funding. Every guest, whether mainstream or wildly out there, got the same fair hearing. Art's curiosity was infectious. But it wasn't just the scheduled guests that made history. It was the callers, the ordinary people with extraordinary stories, and some nights produced moments that became radio legend. The most famous is the Area 51 caller on September 11th, 1997. Art had opened the lines specifically for current or former Area 51 employees. A man came on, voice breaking with raw emotion and urgency, claiming he was a recently discharged worker who had escaped the base. He described how the aliens everyone talked about weren't extraterrestrial at all. They were extra-dimensional beings who had infiltrated the military-industrial complex for decades. He spoke frantically of planned depopulation events designed to control the population and of technology far beyond what we know. The caller was breathing hard, clearly terrified, warning that powerful forces were already closing in on him for talking. Then, mid-sentence, the line went dead. But it wasn't just the call. The entire coast-to-coast satellite feed suddenly failed across hundreds of stations. For several long, eerie minutes, some reports say up to 40, there was nothing but dead air on a live national broadcast. No music, no backup feed, just silence. It had never happened before, and it never happened again. Listeners sat frozen in their cars, bedrooms, and truck cabs, hearts pounding, wondering if the caller had been silenced in real time. When the signal finally returned, Art came back on, audibly shaken, and the moment became instant legend, one of the most replayed and debated clips in all of radio history. Some say it was a hoax or technical glitch. Others swear it was proof that Art had touched something too real, too dangerous. The caller reportedly phoned back later with more, but the dead air that night remains the ultimate what just happened moment that still gives people chills decades later. Then there was Mel's Hole. A caller named Mel Waters described a bottomless pit on his property in Washington state. Throw anything in, tires, garbage, even animals, and you never hear it hit bottom. He claimed the hole had bizarre properties. It could reset dead animals placed near it, and the government eventually seized the land. Art brought Mel back multiple times. The story grew wilder, and listeners were hooked. Dr. Jonathan Reed claimed in 1998 he'd encountered a living extraterrestrial being and even had physical evidence. His appearances sparked endless debate. Mike "Madman" Markham called in about building a time machine in his backyard that accidentally shot a laser into the future. John Titor, the alleged time traveler from 2036, had connections to the show's lore through online posts that echoed Art's open lines energy. Ghost to Ghost shows on Halloween became pure listener-driven terror. Art's annual Halloween tradition turned into hours of open lines dedicated solely to real ghost stories. No guests, no experts, just everyday people calling in from across the country to share their most terrifying, unexplained encounters. These specials ran for hours, sometimes all night, and they became some of the most beloved and spine-tingling broadcasts in the show's history. Millions tuned in because the stories felt so raw and personal, delivered in shaky voices with no script. One of the most twisted tales was the Ronald Opus story from the 1995 and 1996 specials. A caller recounted the bizarre death of a man who had meticulously planned his own suicide. He rigged a shotgun to a tree branch aimed at his head on a timer and climbed a tall building to jump, figuring the fall or blast would kill him. But just as he leapt, his wife, unaware of the plan, stood directly below and was killed instantly by the early gunshot. Ronald survived the fall, but was arrested for her murder. The medical examiner later discovered the wife had died from the gunshot before hitting the ground, while Ronald died from the impact, creating a perfect storm of dark irony that left listeners stunned into silence. A trucker shared the ultimate vanishing hitchhiker story. Late one night on a remote highway, he picked up a quiet young woman who gave him an address and barely spoke. When he arrived, she had vanished from the cab, seatbelt still buckled. The elderly couple inside explained through tears that their daughter had died in a car crash on that exact stretch years earlier. The photo matched the girl perfectly. The trucker drove away shaken, realizing he had given a ghost a final ride home. Shadow people were a recurring nightmare in ghost-to-ghost calls and dedicated open-line episodes. These dark, featureless humanoid figures, often seen out of the corner of the eye or standing silently in doorways, left callers describing overwhelming dread and a sense of being watched or drained. One woman, driving alone at night, saw a tall, featureless black silhouette standing behind a small sapling on the side of the road. As she passed, the figure's head slowly turned to follow her car, even though the tree should have blocked the view. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread and later swore the entity followed her home. Similar shadow person encounters flooded the lines, figures in doorways, watchers at the foot of beds, always silent, always just out of reach. In dedicated shadow people open lines, callers described waking to tall, faceless figures standing at the bedside or hovering over them. One man recounted seeing a shadow person in his university days during an episode that combined with sleep paralysis. He felt paralyzed as a very tall, dark figure jumped onto the bed and onto him, pressing down with real physical weight. Another listener described night after night, waking to tall, faceless shadow figures in the room, creating a constant atmosphere of terror that made sleep impossible. Sleep paralysis stories overlapped heavily with shadow people and old hag encounters. Callers described waking unable to move, with a crushing weight on their chest, and terrifying entities in the room, often shadowy figures, demonic old women, or inky-eyed creatures with static-like skin. One man shared his experiences starting as a toddler, seeing anthropomorphic creatures with giant creepy grins and large inky eyes at the foot of his bed. In later episodes, he felt a man in the darkness, whispering terrifying things while he lay paralyzed, unable to scream or breathe. These accounts blended the physical sensation of paralysis with vivid, malevolent presences that many linked to shadow beings or demonic oppression. Art listened intently, letting callers describe the helplessness and fear in raw detail, turning these nights into shared catharsis for thousands suffering in silence. In a 2001 Ghost to Ghost, a Buck Skinner woman and her husband built a traditional Native American teepee on their remote land. Almost immediately, they experienced full apparitions of native figures performing rituals inside. Objects moved on their own until they respectfully dismantled the teepee and returned the land to its original state. Other unforgettable stories included a couple who both saw the same apparition walking down their hallway at different times, only comparing notes later and realizing the descriptions matched perfectly. One man described his deceased pet dog appearing in ghostly form right after a fatal bear attack, as if saying goodbye one last time. Another caller spoke of a haunting that finally stopped the day an artist painted a portrait of the ghost based on the descriptions, almost as if the spirit just wanted to be seen and remembered. A woman heard a voice whispering her name from directly underneath her bed as a child. It was clear and persistent. Years later, she learned the house had a tragic history tied to a previous occupant who had hidden in that very crawl space. These ghost-to-ghost nights created a communal campfire feel in the darkness, where thousands of strangers shared the same shivers at the same moment. Art handled every story with respect, never mocking, always leaving room for the possibility that something real was reaching out from the other side. Perhaps the single most disturbing and controversial interview Art ever conducted happened on October 23, 1997. The episode opened with an hour of beautiful ambient music from Michael Holm of the group Cusco. Then, Art welcomed a woman who called herself Harlot, her coven name. Her real name was Patsy. She was 32 years old, and she was calling from Salt Lake City, Utah. She described herself as a fourth-generation Earth Witch of the most unholy kind, a proud follower and servant of Satan who came from a long ancestral bloodline of witches and warlocks. She made it crystal clear she was no Wiccan or New Age good witch. In fact, she openly despised Wiccans, calling their practices fake and watered down. Harlot spoke with unapologetic glee about all things evil, explaining in chilling, matter-of-fact detail how she chose her victims, how she worked to corrupt souls and shepherd them straight to the Dark Lord, and how her entire life was dedicated to spreading darkness. She recounted how she had begun indoctrinating her own infant son into the dark service almost from birth, treating it as a sacred family duty. She discussed putting God on trial for the crimes and suffering he had allowed in humanity, and she painted a vivid, unsettling picture of what she believed hell to be like. Throughout the long interview, she remained eerily composed and even joyful, never raising her voice, never sounding unhinged, just calmly certain. Art, who had heard thousands of strange claims, sounded genuinely unsettled at several points, pressing her with questions, but clearly disturbed by the sincerity in her tone. Listeners who tuned in live described feeling physically uncomfortable, with some turning off the radio because the energy felt too heavy. The conversation stretched on for well over an hour and became legendary. It was later analyzed in a follow-up show using reverse speech technology. To this day, people discovering the full Harlot tapes online often call it one of the creepiest things they have ever heard on late-night radio. It wasn't a ghost story or a hoax call. It was a calm, extended window into a worldview that most people found profoundly disturbing, and Art gave it the same open-minded platform he gave every other guest. Behind the microphone, Art Bell was deeply human. he endured personal tragedies: a son who suffered a terrible assault, the death of his beloved wife Ramona in a tragic accident. He spoke openly about his own struggles with back pain from a childhood fall. Later in life, he married Aaron Ruiz and spent time in the Philippines, even broadcasting from there at one point. He retired multiple times, once suddenly in 1998, again in 2002 due to health, and finally from weekend duties in 2007. George Noory took over weekdays, but Art's originals still rerun as Somewhere in Time. He dabbled in new shows like Midnight in the Desert and Dark Matter, but his heart was always with that desert studio. He passed away on April 13th, 2018, at age 72, in his Pahrump home. The cause was complications related to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Some reports also mention an accidental prescription drug overdose. The man who kept millions company in the night finally rested. But his voice, it echoes on. Here's what made Art Bell truly special. He helped people get through the hardest hours. For night shift workers, nurses, factory hands, security guards, Coast to Coast AM was company when the rest of the world slept. Truck drivers crossing endless highways swore by it. One long-haul veteran said Art kept him awake through lonely stretches of I-80, the weird stories making the miles disappear. Insomniacs found comfort in his calm tone. The topics were strange enough to occupy the racing mind, but soothing enough to eventually lull some into sleep. Long drives at 3 a.m. felt less isolating with Art in the passenger seat. Families of shift workers would leave the radio on low, so their loved one felt connected. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a community, a place where you could call in at 2 a.m. and feel heard, where questions about life, death, the stars, and the unknown were welcomed. In an era before podcasts and streaming, Art Bell made the night feel alive. Area 51 Caller, 1997. The infamous anonymous caller claiming to work at Area 51, describing horrors before the line cuts out, often called one of the most intense live moments. Mel's Hole, multiple episodes, starting 1997. The man describing a bottomless pit with bizarre properties on his property. Ghost to Ghost, AM specials, for example, 1995, 1996, 1997, 2000. Halloween open lines filled with ghost stories and paranormal calls. The Ronald Opus story is a standout twisted tale. Art's Parts, 1996. Discussion of mysterious metallic fragments allegedly from a crashed UFO/Roswell, sent to Art E. Phoenix Lights, 1997. Live coverage and caller reactions to the massive UFO sighting over Arizona. Bob Lazar interviews. Discussions on reverse engineering alien craft at Area 51. Father Malachi Martin interviews. Deep dives into exorcism, the Vatican, and supernatural topics. Michio Kaku interviews physics, cosmology, and future tech. Willie Nelson appearance, a more relaxed, memorable celebrity interview. Time Travelers / John Titor. Related calls or alleged psychics and future predictions. UFO disclosure episodes with guests like Stephen Greer or Stephen Bassett. Bud Hopkins on alien abductions. Linda Moulton Howe reports on cattle mutilations and UFOs. Whitley Strieber, often with Art on Dreamland. Alien encounters and communion. Richard C. Hoagland on ancient structures and hyperdimensional physics. Open Lines episodes with bizarre callers, for example, Upside Down Green Farmer's Story from a Ghost to Ghost. Alien in the Freezer or related Dead Alien discussions. Global Superstorm with Whitley Strieber, book-related. EVP/Ghost Hunting or Demon-related calls. New Year's Eve prediction/open lines shows. Annual fan favorites for wild calls and forecasts. Other notable mentions include interviews with Robert Bigelow, Zecharia Sitchin, or episodes on ancient knowledge, Hollow Earth, and psychic phenomena. Ghost to Ghost and Open Lines compilations dominate best of lists for their raw, unpredictable energy. Places to find and listen to. Art Bell shows. Many full episodes and compilations are available across free and paid platforms. Availability can shift due to copyrights, so search specific episode titles/dates for the latest links. Archive.org hosts the Ultimate Art Bell Collection. With thousands of episodes from Coast to Coast, AM, Dreamland, Dark Matter, plus extras and audiobooks. Search for individual shows or the full collection. Also has spooky best of mixes. YouTube, abundant full episodes, best of playlists, Ghost to Ghost compilations, and restored audio. For example, Arts Parts, Area 51 Caller Paranormal Calls. Channels often upload high-quality or cleaned versions. Search Art Bell, episode title/year, or playlists like Best of Art Bell Shows. Dedicated sites and streams. artbellarchive.org. Streams. 1,300 plus classic episodes, focused on UFOs and paranormal topics. U7radio.org. 24/7 stream of classic Art Bell shows. Random rotation. Heavy on fan favorites. Podcasts. The Art Bell Archive, or the Ultimate Art Bell Collection. On Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Forble.co.uk. Many episodes in chronological order. Note, some feeds have been pulled for copyright in the past. Art Bell. Back in Time. Curated classics with occasional paid extras. Art Bell Tape Vault. Archived episodes, often with playlists. iHeartRadio's The Best of Coast to Coast AM. Includes Art Bell era highlights, some hosted by George Noory. Other Reddit communities, r/ArtBell, frequently share links and recommendations. Forble.co.uk has RSS feeds for the Ultimate Collection. For the most complete access, start with archive.org or artbellarchive.org, then supplement with YouTube for specific viral episodes. Some official coast-to-coast content, including Art Bell Vault, is behind paywalls like Coast Insider, but fan archives cover the majority of classics. Search by exact date/guest for precision, as episodes are often dated. For example, January 1st, 1997 Open Lines. Enjoy the late-night vibes. These shows defined a generation of paranormal radio. If you're looking for a specific episode, let me know for more targeted links. He influenced an entire generation of broadcasters, podcasters, and seekers. Shows today owe their existence to the path he blazed. He proved that curiosity, open-mindedness, and a good microphone could connect millions across the darkness. So tonight, as we close this tribute, let's remember Art Bell not just as a radio host, but as the voice that made the unknown feel a little less scary and a lot more interesting. From the high desert to wherever you're listening right now. Thank you, Art. Your signal is still strong. You're still on the air in our hearts. If you've got a favorite Art Bell memory or moment, share it in the comments below when you upload this. Keep the lines open. This has been a tribute to the king of late-night radio. I'm your host, signing off for now. Good night or good morning.